In this video, I'm conducting an interview with my good friend Jake Jacobs. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, what you'd like to see in future videos so I can work on that. I appreciate your super thanks. These small donations help me continue to create the high quality content that you enjoy. And with the membership feature, you can get exclusive access to the most popular videos. My book, Backgammon, Backgame Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it. And if you're interested in lessons, please contact me via email. My email address is also in the description. Again, in this video, it's my great pleasure to be conducting an interview with Jake Jacobs by way of introduction. He really needs no introduction for people that are familiar with Backgammon, been around for a very long time, contributed in many different ways, a legend in that respect, and it's always a pleasant person and a pleasure to be around. Welcome, Jake.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for asking. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Great, great. It's a pleasure to have you. You're joining us. You're in Arizona, right?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona. People don't know that there's another city besides Phoenix, but there is. I'm here.
Tucson is where the university is, right? University of Arizona.
Yeah, that's right. They actually asked years ago, they asked Tucson, do you want to be the capital or do you want to have the university? And we chose the university.
All right, all right. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm excited. I know you have a lot of great stories about backgammon. I'd like to start with a little bit of biographic information, if I may. Where are you from originally? Where did you grow up and do your education?
I grew up just outside of Chicago in a city called Des Plaines. It's about 20 miles northwest as the crow flies. We're directly north of O'Hare Airport. And education, catch as catch can, I guess. I graduated from Maine West High School in Des Plaines in 1969. There are three main township schools, used to be four. The fourth one only lasted about as long as the baby boom did, went from 1969 to 1979. And by 1985, they were filming The Breakfast Club inside it. But Maine East, where my parents went when it was Maine Township. Class of 60 there was a guy named Harrison Ford, who was the first DJ on the high school radio station. Class of 65, the first graduating class from Maine South was Hillary Rodham, who I wonder whatever happened to her. And Maine West, I can't say that it had me, but I guess it did.
Wonderful. And so how long you've been living in Tucson? What kind of work are you doing now?
Well, right now, actually a little of nothing. I'm writing. I'm doing some writing. I was doing some sports betting, but I wore out my welcome with all of the online sports books here. And I was doing some consulting for my old boss and his family, and I just stopped that actually last week.
All right. And you said you're married and you have a daughter, right?
That's right. My wife, Ta, is Thai, and actually so is my daughter, Sassy, but she prefers to go by Benny. Her mom, yeah, see, Thais, have long names. So my daughter's name is Sasatone, and which actually isn't even that long for a Thai name, but it's longish. So they usually they take nicknames like I mean my wife's name is Kampa, but she goes by Ta. And a lot of times you'll hear Lek, which means small, or Nok, which is bird. Anyway, my wife named our daughter uh, Benz, short for Mercedes Benz. But when she'd say Ben, she didn't really hit the Z, so it just sounded like Ben. And for years, my daughter hated that nickname. And didn't want anybody to call her by that name except her mom, and she couldn't really tell her mom not to call her that. And then I don't know, around high school, she changed her mind, so I still call her Sassy, but she goes by Benny, and
Is she sassy herself?
yeah, I'd say so.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that sounds like you've got it there with your family. And how about backgammon? How'd you first get into backgammon?
Well, there's a double irony there. In the early 1970s, when the boom started, both of my brothers learned to play. I have two younger brothers. The youngest one is the white sheep of the family, and he learned to play the game, but then he never really got involved with it at all. But the middle brother, Munchkin, started playing about 1972, 73, and by 73, 74, he was already going down to the North Club, which was the place where the best players in Chicago would congregate. And he was, paying his way through college and, making a couple hundred a week playing for threes, I think. Uh, so I knew, besides Munchkin, I knew Timmy Wisecarver, who was the best player in Chicago before 1976, Greg Shellstorp, Greg DeFotis, Bobby Anderson, Dean Mensch. I'd go down to the North Club, but I didn't, want to play because I didn't want to take up a game that my younger brother was already a lot better at. So I'd hang around with these guys. I'd say, "Oh, come on, let's play some hearts or let's play some spades." And I'd watch them play backgammon, but I just no interest in playing. And on Sunday nights, they would play at a backgammon tournament, a small tournament at a bar called Butch McGuire's. And I went there every Sunday night, but I'd go there and I'd play, pinball. Later, play video games. Hang out with friends, but backgammon, no, I have no interest. And then my brother moved to Las Vegas, and Timmy and Craig followed him out to Las Vegas. Greg and Bobby took up trading, and they weren't, playing backgammon anymore. And the tournament at Butch McGuire's stopped, so all the connections I had with backgammon had been cut off. And that would have probably been the end of the story. But I was in a bar one night, and this was June of '79, and the bartender who I was there to talk to was really busy. It was a Friday night. And there was a guy named Ray who was a regular who, in those days, bars, this was a Greek-owned bar, and they had backgammon boards under the bar. And he had gotten a backgammon board and kept, grabbing people he knew and saying, "Hey, do you want to play backgammon?" And they kept saying, "Hey, no." And then finally, one of his friends looked around, pointed at me, and said, "Why don't you ask that guy? He looks like a backgammon player." And that's how I started playing backgammon.
That's great. That's great. Long time ago. And so you've been playing for a long time. I know you grew up playing games. So what kinds of interests and hobbies do you have outside of backgammon? I know you're an avid reader yourself.
Well, yeah, I read and I actually go to the movie. I got out of movies when I was living overseas. I didn't see very many movies at all. But I now have a collection of discs that I'm working my way through, and they tend to be old. Like last night, I watched a 1945 movie called Hangover Square, which was the last movie starring, actually was the only one who got top billing in, a guy named Laird Kreger, who, if you're a movie buff, you'd know who that is. And if you're not a movie buff, you'd have no idea. But I go to a cinema called The Loft and watch movies like Saturday, I'm going to see the original Manchurian Candidate there. So I'm there. And yesterday I saw Dr. Strangelove. I mean, obviously, I've seen these movies before, but it's great to go see them on a big screen again in a theater. The experience is different. And then the other thing that I do a couple times a week is pub quizzes. I'm going
Yeah.
tonight. I'm doing a pub quiz, which I actually don't like. It's there's an organization called Geeks Who Drink, and they did a brilliant job of marketing. They knew exactly who their demographic was, and it's unfortunately not me. It's really they're aiming at like 30 to 35-year-olds who were into pop culture during the last 20 years. So, the music rounds, they'll usually throw in one song that I would know, maybe something by the Rolling Stones or Warren Zevon, something that goes back 40 or 50 years or more. And then there'll be seven songs that even when I hear the title, lucky if I've heard of the artist. The movies, again, it's the same kind of thing. So that's tonight. Now, Thursday night, I go to a bar where I used to do trivia 20 years ago, live trivia. They've got an online connection to BuzzTime. And so unlike the Geeks Who Drink quizzes, which I'm hopeless at, I do the buzz time, and I'm usually like top 10, top 20 in the country. So I do very
Wow.
well on those, but they're more general knowledge. And then I'm in a quiz league called Fundus Liga that's run out of India, and you get 4 people on Zoom once a week and do that. And then I do uh, Learned League, which is another online thing. They send you a set of questions each day, and of course there's an honor system with that. It's assumed that you won't be looking up the answers.
Right. Well, very good. You mentioned movies. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed like in the past maybe 5 to 10 years, sometimes you'll see like backgammon in some movies. Have you noticed that yourself?
Yeah, I
Or TV
probably
shows?
have. Hard to remember an example right now, except for that old James Bond movie. Classically, was that Octopussy? I think where he.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think I remember that. Yeah, yeah. So
By the
all
way,
the
that is not the most amazing dice roll I've seen in a movie. There was a series of movies out of Hong Kong called God of Gamblers with Chow Yun Fat.
okay.
And in the beginning of the original God of Gamblers, he's playing a dice game with this female Yakuza member. She's, got all the tattoos and she, I don't know if she's cheating or, what seems to be mental power that they have over the dice, but the objective is to get the lowest possible score. And so she it's with a dice cup, and she throws 5 aces and, a perfecta. And so how can the God of Gamblers possibly beat her? And he shakes the dice and bang, and he slams the cup down. And then he lifts up the cup, and the 5 dice are stacked, one on top of the other. And the top die is a 1, and they take that off, and the next die is a 1, and they take that off, and the next die is a 1, and they remove that. It's down to the last two dice, and the top one is the 1. And when they remove that one, the bottom one crumbles to dust. So he's gotten a 4 and beaten her 5.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, well, so a lot of the viewers, uh, probably all the viewers of this channel enjoy backgammon, and of course, both of us do. What are the aspects of backgammon that you enjoy? I know you've played a lot of different games. What do you like about backgammon?
Well, tell you the truth, I don't play as much as I once did. I'd say at different times, like when I first began playing, of course, what I liked about backgammon was that I was beating my friends because I learned up to a point. I learned very, very quickly. Within, I said I started in June. By September, probably 2.5 months after I started playing, a friend of mine and I had gone to Butch McGuire's and said, "Hey, we'd like to start the backgammon tournaments again." And so we started playing, and he and I were the two dominating players in that particular, venue. So we'd play, and then we had a chouette, which I think we started at $1 a point, and over the next couple of years, it slowly worked its way up to threes. And so the first year, we started a points race in 1980, and the first year he was number one, I was number two, and the two of us were the two big winners in the chouette. And the next year I was number one, he was number two, and we were the two big winners in the chouette. And then I moved to Las Vegas and, realized that I had been a big fish in a small pond, although I actually then had a very steep learning curve in the, first 6 months after I moved to Las Vegas. But, at some point, probably during the 1990s, I mean, obviously I liked winning, but there were other things that I liked about, the game. I liked the camaraderie. I was in a lot of chouettes,
Yeah.
and I made a lot of good friends. Some of them are still good friends 30 years later. And then I took up writing. I mean, I'd edited a magazine in Las Vegas in the early '80s, but I actually took up writing articles on a regular basis right about the beginning of 1990, and I liked that a lot. So, now if I go to a tournament, I think the main thing is just to see people, old friends, and, experience that again. So you could say the camaraderie, but, there's an element of nostalgia, I think, in it.
Yeah, I remember the last couple of tournaments that we've had, the big tournaments in Los Angeles, we've had dinner together, and it's just like I really enjoy like just sitting down and speaking with you and enjoying dinner, and you always have some outstanding stories like these ones and others. So wonderful. And you said you improved pretty quickly. So this is one of the questions people really like, the viewers, is like, how did you improve when you were learning, and how would you recommend people to improve their game now?
Okay, well, when I first started, I told you that I met this guy Ray in a bar, and after he had taught me, I mean, he had to teach me how to set up the board, even though I'd seen the game, I really knew nothing. But we played a couple of practice games, and then he said, "Hey, how'd you like to play for drinks?" Well, it was almost closing time, and I figured, yeah, I'll buy the guy a drink or two. But it turned out that I won, and he never really he bought me one drink, and then it was closing time. So the next week, I was back there on Friday night, and he turned up again, and I didn't even remember how to set up the board. And so it was a repeat of the previous week. And again, I won. Instead of winning 3 drinks, I won 4 drinks and collected one. And then I thought, okay, he's going to want to play me for money. And I know that he's not a good player. I mean, I'd seen good players, so I knew what they looked like, even if I didn't know exactly what good players did. I knew, what one looked like, and he did not look like one. But uh, I also knew that if he wasn't a good player, I was really not a good player. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew what the best book on the game was. I didn't know how to pronounce Paul McGrill's name at the time, but I had a buddy who had a copy of Backgammon. And I mean, I would have known right where to lay my hands on it in his living room. And we worked together. His name was John Elliott. And I went to John and I said, hey, you've got that book by that guy, Magriel, and I'd like to borrow it. And so he said, oh, sure. So he brought it to work, and I read it twice that week, and it was amazing. I said, "Wow, this makes so much sense." And I went to the bar the third week, and sure enough, Ray shows up. I mean, it's late, and he says, "Let's play for dollars." And I said, "Okay." So now I proceeded to beat him for, I don't know, 10 or 12 bucks, something like that. And then the owner of the bar, George, who was a decent player, said, okay, you and me, we play. And I said, okay. And then he quickly won back Ray's money. So I'd broken even. And I told John about this. And John started bringing his backgammon board to work. And in the summer, I was the dispatcher, the evening dispatcher at the cab company. And summertime is kind of a slow time. John was my relief. He'd come in and relieve me at 1 o'clock in the morning. So he'd bring his backgammon board, and we'd sit there after I got off, and we'd play in the office and talk about the game. So the next week we went back, and Ray wanted to play me, and George wanted to play John. And he locked the doors of the bar. And when we stumbled out of there at dawn, Ray and George would never play us again. I had won about 20 bucks, and I think John was playing for fives, and he had won $140. So, not bad. And now we started going to that same bar and, playing backgammon in there every Friday night after work, because he didn't have to work to relieve me on Fridays. So, we were going in there and we were playing, and between, reading books, because later I got some books from my brother, and I actually got some matches to study. They existed back then, but you had to take a written, transcribed copy of a match and go through and play it out and kind of figure out for yourself, like, ooh, look at that, Eric Seidel did that, and that maybe that means something. So
He was a backgammon player before he was a poker player.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I knew Eric as a backgammon player, but I mean, if you do that and if you play a lot, it's going to help. But now, there was probably a leveling off because the competition was only about so good. And even, in Chicago, I mean, there was Gammons of Chicago opened in December of 1979. That was Howard Markowitz and Ida Weil opened this backgammon club, which was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the beginning, and had, big tournaments every other Sunday in the afternoon. I couldn't go to the nightly ones on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because I worked. But we were going down there, and I would say that by the time I left Chicago in February of 1982, I was a good player by Chicago standards, but I wasn't the best player in town, and Chicago wasn't a backgammon powerhouse at that point. You had some people that were, they were pretty good, but Howard, Dean Mensch, Taki was coming up by then. There was a guy named Chris Stanford, a guy named Fred Grand that nobody would remember now, another guy named Sammy Hakimi, but I mean, if these guys went out to the coasts, they'd be, kind of laughed at that time. Howard later got to be pretty good. But I moved to Las Vegas, and now I all of a sudden had another really steep learning curve, because what happened was I got there and I was rooming now with my brother and with Timmy Weiscarver. And Timmy had all sorts of matches, and he had computer printouts, and he had a lot of restless energy, and he wanted to talk backgammon. So, and Timmy had been, in the early 1970s or mid 1970s, he was the best player in Chicago. He was really good. And so, and he became a teacher. He's actually still teaching. So he was certainly a really good person to study with. My brother, would sometimes, sit in, and my brother, was a very good player, and, also a good guy to have a brain that you could pick. And then there were two other guys. One of them, there used to be a backgammon club in Las Vegas, and it was run by a guy named Michael Maxiculi, who was known as Max. And Max was an underrated player, but he was actually a really, really good player. And people just didn't know that. But he published the Las Vegas Backgammon magazine. And so he had, at the time, I believe, the world's largest collection of backgammon materials. There was something like 103 known English language backgammon books, and he had 100 of them. And he had most of the magazines and newsletters, and he had unpublished articles. And I read through his library. And, and then, things would come up, positions would come up, or situations would come up, and we'd talk about them. And also, I'd gone out there to play blackjack, and the team that I was on was not having a good run when we started out. So it was months before I got a payday. And so I'd go to the Sunday night backgammon tournament at the Jockey Club, and I would, play people for money. And when you really need to earn money, or it's the difference between TV dinners or being able to go out and splurge on Burger King, it focuses the mind wonderfully. And so, yeah, I mean, I just, I became like laser focused on winning. And I did. I was winning very, very consistently in these games. And then the final piece of the puzzle, there used to be this big tournament called the Plimpton Cup. There had been an attempt back in the 70s to start a $1 million tournament. A guy named Jules Sklar from Phoenix, Arizona, had this vision of this $1 million tournament. But what he wanted was a bunch of satellite tournaments, and he wanted all the tournament directors around the country to send him the money first, so he'd have the prize money. And their reaction was, yeah, we don't really know you, and we're not going to send you, $1 million just because you've got a good idea. So it sort of fell through, but some people in New York said, well, wow, this seems like a great idea after all. And they managed to put something together with the guy named Henry Watson, who was a local New Yorker. who organized this tournament, and they got George Plimpton to lend his name to it because it was going to be the World's Amateur Championships. And in 1978, they had the first tournament. It had $180,000 first prize. It was won by a guy from Canada named I think he was from no, he was from Ohio, named Chico Felberbaum. And I think number two was David Leibowitz, who for a while was a well-known player. And that got it rolling. And eventually it settled to a $100,000 first prize and was held once or twice a year in Las Vegas. So by now, this is 1982. It's been going on for a number of years. And Craig Chelstorp, another guy from Chicago, had originally he had been a U.S. junior chess champion about 1969, 1970, and then he took up backgammon and was kind of mentored by Timmy Wisecarver. And then Timmy had left town for a year, and by the time he came back, Craig had passed him up. And by the early 1980s, Craig was one of the best players in the world. People didn't know that. He kept a very, very low profile. It's the way he liked it. But the top players recognized him as a peer. And Craig actually was a really, really good teacher. And he organized a seminar. There were a bunch of us that, unlike Craig, who had cashed in, he only played in a few tournaments, but he almost always cashed. And actually Timmy and my brother had cashed in tournaments, and so they weren't eligible for the Plimpton anymore. But there were a bunch of us blackjack players that were. And so the deal was that Craig would teach a couple times a week, and then he would have 10% of our action in the Plimpton Cup. And so we had these twice a week seminars where he would teach and we would discuss positions. And it was a great, great learning experience. So, by the time I didn't do anything in the Plimpton, but I'd say by that fall, I got to play one of Chicago's best players was out there for a tournament in the fall, because there were usually 2 tournaments a year in Vegas then. And I drilled him pretty good, beat him for about 100 points. And and by that time I was really, my game had really come on a lot. And then the next year I cashed. I went to California in June of '83 to play in the Cavendish Invitational. I came in second to a young guy named Joe Russell. And there was another young guy that I met then. A couple of young guys I met then. One of them was a tall, skinny kid named Mike Svobodny. And there was another guy whose mom was running she was managing the backgammon club named Steve Sachs. And we actually left that tournament, and there were 6 of us in my car driving back to Las Vegas that night. It was me, my brother, my then roommate, a guy named Peter Wagner, Steve Sachs, and Mac Ballard, and Mac's girlfriend, Lorian. And we were all going to play in the Plimpton Cup that year. And I remember, when I sat down at my first board, I was, grandfathered in. I had signed up before I cashed in the Cavendish tournament. So it was my last year of eligibility. And it was, of course, Joe's last year of eligibility. And he's 3 boards down. And he said, if we meet, let's hedge. And and I think Ed O'Loughlin was playing as an amateur, and Spobotny was playing as an amateur. But it was won by a 21-year-old kid from Michigan named Joe Sylvester.
Uh-huh.
So,
Well,
but now, what would I recommend today? Well, I'm a book man. I like books. But today, and also back then, you really needed to know good players and sit and talk with them and play with them, and get that feedback, that interaction. Now it's bots. That's how people study. That's how people learn. But you should probably have somebody who knows the game, who can talk to you about what you're seeing on the bot.
Yeah, fantastic. That's how I learned too. Backgammon by Paul McGreal was the first book I read. So reading and practice are outstanding. I know you played a lot in the 70s and 80s when backgammon was very popular, and now it's not quite as popular as it was. But what are your thoughts as to how we can get it more popular, how we can get more people playing the game?
Well, I mean, backgammon went through two periods where it was enormously popular. One in the 1920s, which was a games mad time, at a time when we didn't have electronic devices, we didn't have televisions. Um, so people, 1925 was when Mahjong swept America. Contract bridge, the rules for that were created in 1925, and it became a craze. 1925 was the year that it's believed that the backgammon doubling cube was invented, and backgammon became a craze. And then, by about 1940, backgammon had sort of died, and it was lurking in private clubs. About 25 years went by, and Prince Obolensky decided that he wanted to revive it, and he was drawing on the crowd that hung out in these clubs. People like Ozzie Jacoby, was a bridge player who would, belong to the New York Racket Club, I think. Certainly was on the rules committee in 31 for backgammon. Barclay Cook, was a gentleman gambler, Yale graduate. And I mean, these were the kind of guys. John Viator's dad, John Viator, well-known player, and he's like the grandson of the guy who invented Jello. Um, so, I mean, these are the kind of people who were playing backgammon. So when Obolensky decided to have a big tournament and took the rules that the committee had come up with 30 years earlier, he was going to the clubby types, and he had this world championship, and it started to attract sort of a jet set crowd. And again, the next thing you know, you had black and white scotch, and was it Merit cigarettes, and some of the others that were sponsoring. And my brother told me, and other people who played in Chicago around 1973, 1974, you could find a tournament every night of the week in Chicago, some nights two or three, and there would be 100 people at these tournaments. It was just kind of crazy. But what you're talking about is lightning in a bottle, and the odds of lightning striking a third time, not so good. But I think that right now backgammon has a good, stable base, and I think that you could, you've got local promoters, people like Michael and April Message, and actually, I never asked them how they pronounce their name. Is it Message or Messick?
She told me Messick.
Messick, okay. And you've got Bill and Tara, and you've got Candace, and so you've got a lot of grassroots. I guess Carol is still running in Michigan, and Pat in I'm in on a weekly basis. So these are all these are all helpful. Lynn Ehrlich in New York, but could backgammon be televised? I don't know. Maybe. The thing is that with a game like poker, they were able to do the hidden hole card. But what's your hidden hole card in backgammon? And
Right.
you've seen yourself doing commentary that you can do effective commentary pretty well for backgammon players, but trying to do backgammon commentary for the general public is
Right.
really tough, because backgammon is usually played at a certain pace that's faster than in poker. I mean, oh yeah, they what the guy's got in the hole, and they sit there and they cogitate, and then they think some more, and then maybe they shove out their money, and then the other guy picks his nose, and so
It's
there's a lot of
flow.
time to talk about what's going on. And and usually there isn't all that much for a poker game, for a poker analyst to talk about. It's but with backgammon, you might have to talk about 4 or 5 different candidate plays. You might have to talk about the match score and the gammon rate and recube vig, and there are just so many factors that if you're going to analyze a position properly. And for the public to try to tune in and hear all this jargon, I mean, they kind of know that, okay, if this guy's got an ace queen, but the other guy's got a pair of kings, they know the ranking of the hands. But if they tune in and hear somebody saying, well, depending on how the back game develops, I don't think his timing is good because he's only trailing by 57 pips, and they're going, what the hell is that? And so yeah, I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I think backgammon is a visual game, and sometimes you see like the world championships, they have like thousands, tens of thousands of views. I guess it's not quite as much as the millions like poker or something else, but I think that that's kind of getting there. I feel like the COVID pandemic was obviously unfortunate. We never want it to happen again, but sometimes I like to take away positive things. And one of the positive things in backgammon is like people were playing online, and now you have all these people on social media and things like that. A lot of people wrote books during that time. So it's become popularized. And now I see like on the other social media, like on Instagram, you have these social backgammon groups that attract like hundreds of players, and they're like in their 20s, and half of them are female, which is like the opposite of what we're used to. So I mean, some of these things are actually good.
Yeah, no, see, that's you're talking about something that certainly is encouraging to hear, and it's something that you probably can guess. I know almost nothing about. When back in 1995, early in 1995, or maybe as early as late '94, there was a guy in Chicago named Stu Katz, and he was the apostle of internet backgammon. And he was going around all of us who played at Bill Davis's club and getting us hooked up. And he at the time, he had a crush on a player, Leslie Lockett. And so she was the first person that he got on. What the heck was that?
Fibs.
I can't remember the name of the InterAccess was the
Oh,
name of the ISP that
oh, I see.
and you got a package. You got about 10 programs. There was web crawler, and there was
Yeah,
I don't know, different programs that serve
right.
different functions. And so the backgammon players, they get on these Usenet groups, rec.games.backgammon, and they talk about backgammon. Anyway, there was Fibs, the first internet backgammon server.
Fibs. That's right.
And so I was, I don't know, maybe the third player that Stu got hooked up. And later he got, Paul and Mary Franks, and he got Phil Simborg, and, some others hooked up. But Paul Klein. But I got on and I started playing on Fibs. And, a couple of things happened. One of them was that I started working on my first book. And so I had this feeling that when I was at the computer, because back then, it's a strange thing to say, but in the mid 1990s, people didn't actually spend all their time sitting at a computer. In fact,
Right,
a
right,
lot of
right.
people didn't sit at a computer at all.
But that's what we do.
So I felt if I was sitting at a computer, I was supposed to be working on my book. And, if I was on Fibs, I wasn't working on my book. But the other thing that, to me, I mean, I love, we'd play in the Chouettes, and, we'd be drinking beer, and, we'd be making jokes and having a good time. And the experience of playing online just didn't seem to have, that for me. It wasn't the
Different.
same, So, I played on Fibs a few times, and then I stopped playing. And a few years later, I tried again. I think it was when I was in Hong Kong, and had a lot of free time because I was only working 2 days a week. And I got back on and played a bit. And again, I just said, yeah, this isn't what I want to do. So I don't play online. I don't belong to any of the backgammon websites.
Right. you play, are there people that you play with like in person nowadays?
just when I go to tournaments. The only backgammon player here in the Tucson area is a friend of mine, a guy I met in Chicago years ago called Ralph Burns. And the only time that we played backgammon, there's another guy that I know online. I see on Facebook all the time named Ralph Bird. And Ralph Bird used to come here to Tucson and he would stay at a place called Canyon Ranch that is 2 blocks from my house.
Oh,
And he came to town. He was staying at Canyon Ranch. And so the other Ralph and I went there and met him and we had a chouette. And Ralph Bird, if you're listening to this, we still owe you money. In fact, I collected from Ralph Burns, and so I'm walking around, with this money burning a hole in my pocket. And I haven't seen the guy in person. It's been about 3-4 years now. Because yeah, he we only played for about a half an hour, and he won 11 points, and so I have that $220 anytime we get together.
great, great. All right, and you said you've written some books. I know you've written one about backgammon. A lot of people don't know it, called "Can a Fish Taste Twice as Good?" And that was with Walter Trice. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I've actually written 2 books, and I guess I'll get
Right.
to the second one. But
Yeah, yeah, talk about both.
yeah, I started out writing articles for initially for Bill Davis and for Carol Cole. Bill Davis had the Chicago Point, and Carol had the Flint Area Backgammon News. These were both international newsletters. People all over the world subscribed, read them. I mean, now we're not talking about millions of people, but we're talking about hundreds of people or thousands of people who were geographically distributed, and so they certainly punched above their weight. They were things that if you were a serious player, you read these. Now, ironically, a decade before, when I worked for Max, most backgammon publications back then tended to, give you tournament results and a lot of social news. So and so was, Lucille Ball was cited at this tournament in Los Angeles. That was the kind of thing. And then they might have an article, a technical article that would explain why, if even though you were an underdog, if your opponent had a man on the 5 and a man on the 2 and doubled you on the last shake, you should still take the cube. That was the level of analysis in most of these. So I started a magazine. I thought people wanted, that they liked backgammon problems. They liked match analysis. They liked quizzes. So it was only one issue, and then Max had problems, but the Backgammon Scholar. Well, now 10 years later, there was a lot more, of the problems that I thought people in the early '80s wanted to see. By the early '90s, there was a lot more of that, and I was ready to adopt a lighter touch. There was Danny Kleinman, who was inspired by some bridge writers, mainly a guy named S.J. Simon, who had written a book in 1945 called "Why You Lose at Bridge." And then Victor Malo was another one, Bridge in the Fourth Dimension, Bridge in the Menagerie, who he had these characters. I mean, Simon had characters, Malo had characters, so Danny Kleinman had characters, especially in his Miss Lonelyblots,
Yes.
articles. And I like that style, so I would write about things that happened in the Chouettes, and but I'd turn the players into fictional characters, like Dr. Frankenstein. That was me, and there was Igor and Renfield. There were a couple of players, Lucky Nelson and Steve Potashnik, and it was all about my losing a couple of 32 cubes when I rolled one of the world's worst horror shakes. And people liked it. And there was probably a little bit of an educational content, but mostly they were just good stories. Well, I was at a tournament in '95 in Vegas, and by now some of us had jellyfish. Um, so we were using the bots. We were looking at positions, and there was more introspective analysis going on. and I had a position come up that the score was 4 away, 3 away, and I looked at this position and I thought, well, could this possibly be a double? And I just something told me I should double this, and I doubled it. And later, I wound up, losing the game in the match, and but I just, I thought maybe I'm onto something here, and I went around, because in those days you'd write down the positions, and then you'd take the position card around, you'd show it to people, and I was showing it to people, and everybody said, "You doubled that? Are you nuts?" And the funny thing is that if 5 years later, if you went around with that same position card and showed it, and people would be scratching their head now and going, maybe this is a double. Well, I eventually, as the bots got better, I determined that, it's not a double. I was thinking right, but it wasn't a double. That part isn't important. What's important is jellyfish couldn't analyze this kind of position. So what I had to do was try to solve the problem in another way. I mean, I was using jellyfish, but I couldn't just plug it in and say, is this a take, or is this a double? Because jellyfish, it wasn't up to a level where it could really properly answer that question. So what I did was I said, okay, here are all the possible rolls that I could roll, and now I'm going to roll out every position that every possible roll, and see what those equities are, and then I'm going to plug all of those equities into a match equity table, because jellyfish couldn't do that. And I'm going to see, like, how many backgammons and what match score does that put us at, how many gammons, and so for doubling versus non-doubling. And even if that sounds like a lot of work, it was obviously a lot of work. I was doing it all by hand and hand calculating everything. And so I wound up writing an article that was about, I think, 11 pages, probably 3 times as long as my normal articles. It was called "Should I Really Make an Ass of Myself If I'm Only a Little Behind?" And kind of a pun there. But anyway, and I wrote it, and I had a lot of fun. And the result that I came up with all this hand analysis was that it was a close double. So obviously I got it wrong, but hey, A for effort. And so I said, boy, that I really enjoyed doing that. And maybe I could do another sort of serious article that takes work, but I'm willing to do the work. So I had the idea for doing another long article, maybe even 15 or 20 pages, about doubling in uneven matches. And this was something that you can go back and you can read Barclay Cook's Paradoxes and Probabilities, for instance, and some of the positions in there, he'll say, well, maybe if it's a strong player playing a weak player, they should drop this. But if anyway, it was all bad advice. But he at least was talking about the difference between skill levels, and that actually making that mattering in in your play. So I thought, okay, maybe I can do something. I mean, I had an idea of how to go about it, but to go about it, what I was going to need was to create some kind of a match equity table that would reflect differences in strength. And I had never built a match equity table. It wasn't really something that most people did or thought about. I mean, there were probably most backgammon players at the time had never even seen a match equity table. I mean, I'm not kidding. They'd probably never seen one, had no idea what a match equity table was. But I had a friend, a guy I knew from playing at tournaments. We used to get together late at night and drink Heinekens and talk about backgammon. A guy named Walter Trice, who edited a magazine, a newsletter called Anchors in New England for the New England Backgammon Club. And so I'd call Walter and, I'd say, yeah, what about this and what about that, relating to, the equities between, players of different strengths. And so at some point, Walter said, why don't I send you my program? And I said, what program is that? And he said, well, I've got this program I called MEG, the Match Equity Generator, and you can build your own match equity tables, and you can program it to come up with different tables. And I said, yeah, that sounds, really, helpful. So he sent the thing out, and I looked at it, and I thought, this is amazing. And now, brain gets to working, and I thought, well, I was thinking by now I could probably write a book. I mean, you using this tool, I could write a book. And I was thinking, how many people are ever going to buy, a backgammon book like this? It probably, 500, 1,000. That's about all that a book like this will ever sell. I said, but this program, this is going to be like jellyfish. This, thousands of people are going to want this. Maybe 10,000 people will buy a copy of this. So, now I'm thinking, and so I very cleverly, I said, hey, Walter, I called him up, and I said, I've got an idea. I said, how about I list you as co-author on my book? I'm going to write a book. I said, how about I list you as the co-author, and we go 50-50, and I'll give you 50% of the proceeds of the book, and you give me 50% of the proceeds of sales of Meg. And he said, okay. And I was spot on. Fish has probably sold, I don't know, it may have sold over 1,000 copies by now, all these years later. But I kind of lost track. But I was really in the ballpark on how many copies it would sell. And Meg, I think it sold about 5 copies. Nobody bought it. But yeah, I mean, I think Walter was married, and I think I sent Donna. I got another payment on some copies of the book from Carol about a year ago, and sent Donna a check. But yeah, now Walter, I mean, he did more than just write Meg in a companion program. He certainly, I'd call him a lot, pick his brain, and then he did the copy editing on the book. So he didn't do any writing. I mean, not even, we had the 2 authors' bios, and even his author's bio, I wrote that. But yeah, I mean, without Walter, the book wouldn't have existed. And so yeah, he certainly, without him, and he could have written his own version of Fish, I'm sure. Whereas I would never have been able to program Meg. I mean, maybe now, but not then. So yeah, it all worked out, and it then inspired me, having written that. By this was it came out in 1996, summer '96, and I started thinking, I've got a lot of backgammon articles, and they're saved on my computer, and because by that time I had my own computer, and I thought, okay, maybe I could collect them, and so I came out with a collection called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the 4-Point," and it was a collection of all the articles I'd written up to that point. Now, I started collecting The Prime of Our Lives, which was going to be the next collection. And at some point that was getting filled up, and then I started another, collection. So every time I wrote an article, I would copy and paste into the end, or actually do an insert text and insert it into the end of, and somewhere along the line, I said, all right, I've got to start a third one, because the second one was, instead of a couple hundred pages, it was a couple thousand pages long. And by now I've written over 400 articles. So if I started issuing them as books like 4-Point, I'd probably have anywhere 12, maybe 15 more books that I could issue. But 4-Point never sold as much as Fish. People were less interested in collections, so I don't think that, unless if I hit the lottery someday, and then as a vanity project, I could always issue them. I did start another serious book at one time, called Penetrating Match Play 5 points with which to skewer your opponents. And it was going to be the definitive work on how to play 5-point matches. And I got a running start on it, but then I went overseas and things happen. You get busy, and so I
Right.
never.
Life happens. Yeah, I've written, like, I did a video on 5-point matches, and Michi is working on a book on that. So there's a lot out there.
Well, there is a good book out there on matches that came out, about a year or two ago. It's really quite a good book.
Yeah, the ones I've enjoyed very much on Match Player, Nick Blazer's book,
Well,
Adjusting
that's
Human
that's the one I
Nature.
mean.
That's the one.
Nick's.
And Dirk Sheeman wrote a lot about it in The Theory of Backgammon, which is very technical. And
Yeah.
maybe 20 or 30 years ago, before all this, Kit Woolsey wrote an outstanding book, How to Play Tournament Backgammon. So that was fantastic. It's you've been involved with this for so long, you've written so much. I think nowadays you can actually, if you should ever be interested, Amazon, which is why it's just how I did my book and Nick Blazer did his, and many people, they just kind of like print on demand. So it might be something to consider.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, I've thought about that, but I did print on demand. I wrote a mystery novel.
oh yeah,
Um, yeah, I wrote a mystery. I was working on a book, a novel about Korea, actually, which would have been, kind of an epic romance. And at some point, I'd written several hundred pages, more than 300 pages. And it's not terrible, but, I realized that I had sort of bitten off, considering I'd never written a book before, I'd written off more than, probably I could chew at that point. I didn't have, I thought, the chops to do it properly. And I sort of backed off, and I had an idea. I wanted to write about the Philippines, and I just I mean, I just wanted to write about the Philippines and my experiences there. But it occurred to me that turning it into a hard-boiled mystery would not be a bad way to frame, even though it was sort of a way of saying, hey, this is the kind of stuff I saw and the people I met, and blah blah blah. And it's not like I had encountered any murder mysteries while I was there, but it just seemed like, yeah, that fiction genre would work, and I could tell people about what the Ermita neighborhood of Manila was like in 1989. So I started working on this mystery, and the main character, the guy who solves the mystery, was based on a really good friend of mine who's been dead now for a long time. But in fact, he was dead before I even really got started on the book. Uh, but yeah, so I wrote this book, and then I went overseas, and I'd written it, and I'd looked at it again, and redrafted it, and then I thought, okay, I need to sit back for a couple of months and let it cool off in my brain, so I could look at it with a little more detachment. And then I'm going to go back and do a third draft, and then I'm going to try to sell it. And then I went overseas, and I was busy, and it was nearly 10 years had gone by, and my brother was talking to a guy that was editing a line of fiction about gambling. And it was for the publisher that had published his book. My brother wrote a nonfiction book about gambling called Gambling Wizards. And so it was this publisher, Anthony Curtis and Huntington Press, which is a great source for books about gambling. And the late Arnold Snyder was editing for him. And Arnold, got a hold of me, and he said, your brother says that you've got this, this novel. And I said, well, it's not really about gambling. It's, the character's a gambler, but, it's not about gambling. And he said, well, send it to me anyway. And I sent it to him. He said, oh, I want to publish this. And then Anthony saw what kind of sales he was getting out of the first, piece of fiction that he had published. And he said, nah, I don't want to do that anymore, because nobody buys books about gambling, fiction books about gambling. So Arnold said, yeah, but Michael Kaplan and I, we're gonna get, or was it Michael Koenig? It was one of the Michaels, and he said, we're talking about putting together our own line of fiction, and I want to publish your book. And I said, okay, great. Well, then it was, yeah, I want to publish the book, but I got to mow the lawn this weekend, and I want to publish the book, but I got to rearrange my sock drawer, and whatever. And a year went by, and I thought, they're self-publishing, Amazon, and a book. People aren't going to promote it. They're not going to. It's not going to be displayed the way I think it should be displayed on, big cases when you first walk in the door of Borders. It's going to be tucked away somewhere in the mystery section under J. And, so I can promote as well as that, and I'll get more of the royalties. So I told Arnold, hey, I'm going to take care of the book myself. And I did. I went through Create Space was the arm of Amazon publishing. And I mean, I have to say that it was a pretty smooth experience. And I felt like I got really lucky with the cover. I paid for somebody to do a cover, and they did two different options. And I thought both of them were great, but one of them was very different from what I had pictured myself, and the other one was what I pictured, except it was better. It was like even better than I had pictured it, and I went with that. And so yeah, The Battered Butterfly, available on Amazon. It's out there.
I'll put a link in the description. You're really an outstanding storyteller. We've talked a lot about different things, backgammon, adventures, your books, all sorts of things. I could sit here all day and hear your stories, but do you have maybe one final adventure story that would be interesting for the audience to hear about backgammon?
Well, a final adventure. I don't know. I've played in some unusual places, and some of them, of course, are in the collection. The funny thing happened on the way to the 4-Point. So I can remember playing backgammon in an apartment in a penthouse overlooking the Happy Valley racetrack in Hong Kong. And I can remember playing in a bar under the stairs in a kind of a dive in Itaewon in Seoul, Korea. So I've been in a few places with the backgammon board, and I guess my one of my favorite places in the fall of 1995, Bill Davis pointed out that there was a letter in his backgammon newsletter from a Dr. William Block, Bangkok, Thailand. And it said, Mr. Joran Hasselquist is going to direct the first Thailand Open. And Bill said, you might be interested in that. I had been to Thailand exactly once. Well, no, that's not quite true. Actually, I'd been to Thailand about 7 times or 8 times or something, but the 7 of them were just during the day from like 10 in the morning until 6 at night on Phuket Island, and then I'd been to Bangkok the year before. But anyway, I'd been to Thailand, and so I got a hold of Joran, and I said, now when is this tournament? And he was sort of pushing it back because he wasn't sure that it was strictly legal. Because Thailand's very funny about gambling related things. They actually raided the duplicate bridge club one day a couple of years ago. I guess that the charges were dismissed, but so yeah, you never know what the legal status is there. And so he said, well, when I get it straightened out. And it turned out that it was going to be right after New Year's in 1996. And Marty, the guy who was the inspiration for the main character Lefty in The Battered Butterfly, said, "Oh, if you're going to Thailand, I'll go to Thailand because I've never been to Thailand." But he wanted somebody to sort of break ground, to say, "Okay, we're going to stay at this hotel and we're going to eat at this restaurant." And after that, he could go back himself because he'd know where to go and where to stay. And then another guy named Andy Krenitz, who was living in Chicago then, said, "Yeah, I'd like to go." So the 3 of us wound up going to Thailand, going to Pattaya, and the tournament was held in a place called the Style Restaurant. It was on the beach, Jomtien Beach, and they actually had a rule. This is true. They had a rule that if you were in the box and a coconut fell on your head and knocked you out, you lost the box. And so so that was the coconut rule. But yeah, I mean, we were playing outdoors, and we at night we would go to a place called the 19th hole, which was on street they call Walking Street, and they had a lot of backgammon boards there. And I said, boy, this is a lot of fun. And I would come back. I thought I'd go back there and play again. And I went back during the year. And in fact, my next trip, I got there and they actually raided the 19th hole while I was at the airport waiting to come in from Bangkok to go to Pattaya. They had a raid, and one guy who lived there, his wife had called the police because she had an argument with her husband, and said, my husband is losing all of my money and playing backgammon, and he was just sitting at the bar about 6 feet away from the backgammon game, watching some other guys play backgammon when the police suddenly whipped out their badges. They had showed up in plain clothes and started taking pictures. And they said, "What's your name?" And he told them, and then they arrested him. And he said, "Well, what are you doing? Why are you arresting me?" And they said, "The 2 meter rule. If you're within 2 meters of the game, you're part of the game." And so they arrested like 8 guys who eventually got bailed out. But it didn't stop things, but it slowed things down a bit. But that was the tournament. I was going there every January from 1996 up to about 2010 was, I think, the last tournament. And I kept going to Pattaya even after that till 2020, right before COVID. That was the last year. So 25 years of going there. But in 1998, January of 1998, there was a Thai girl there playing video games at the 19th hole where we played, and we started dating. And my friend Marty, the one that based the book on, 6 months later we were in Thailand, and I introduced them, and he said, of all the girls I've seen you with, you should marry this one. And he never knew it, but I did.
Wow. Wow. What a great story. So many great stories. Thank you so much for everything. I mean, of course, the
Oh, it's
stories,
my pleasure.
all you've done for Backgammon, really appreciate it. It's been really a pleasure to have you. I'd love to have you again. Maybe we can play a match one time. Do you have any final comments before we conclude the video?
Well, I did tell you were talking about positions, and I told you that the position that's displaying on your screen there was
Yeah.
very similar to a position that I looked at earlier today. And back when I was working with Max, and this is something that I thought was interesting about Max, was that if you play in chouettes with intermediates or like even open players, you'd hear a lot of oh, we should do this because duplication, or we should do this because timing, or they've got buzzwords. And it's not that they're necessarily wrong about reasons for things, but usually it's a concept that they're applying to the position, and it's very much an immediate sort of analysis. So Max could talk about how games would develop. And that's something that, if you talk to an expert player, a real expert player, that's the kind of discussion that you wind up getting into. How is this game going to develop? And based on that, what sort of move do we choose? So it's not it's not tactical. It's a strategic
Right.
view of the game. And as it happened, the position that I could remember specifically talking to Max about, one of the books in his library was Alpha Backgammon by Baron Vernon Ball. And Vernon Ball believed in mind control, solo mind control, and controlling the dice with your brain. But he did write this book, and the solutions weren't all use your brain to roll a 6-5 or whatever. It was there was actually some advice in there, and I don't remember the book as being particularly good, but there was a position that at the time, I looked at it and I was a little bit shocked because it seemed to be, somewhat counter to prevailing wisdom in 1982. So if you look at no, I don't know your I don't remember exactly what was in Vernon Ball's book either, but I looked at a position that I think was right. So I had for Brown, I had a 5' from the 3-point out
Yep.
and a spare on the midpoint. That was where I placed Brown's other 11 checkers. And then for white, it's the position that you've got, except the spare on the 8, the spare on the 4, and one of the men from the 6 all get stacked up on the ace point. So now the 2-3 backgame has a 20 number double shot. And Vernon Ball said, this is a pass. Now, I don't know if he actually got the position right, and you can screw the position up so it isn't exactly that, and it might not even be a double depending on what's on Brown's side of the board, or if the position was the blot on the 7-point with both the 8 and 9 points made, that would not be a double. But in the position that I described with the blot on the 6-point, it's a big pass. And that, in 1982, that would have been a little surprising because most people knew that, well, back games, even if you got a 20 number shot, you normally aren't supposed to double those. If you do, the other guy might have a beaver. And, so the idea that the back game would double with 20 numbers on the come and, the other side should be passing. And, but Max took one look at it and he saw, that's a pass. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, yeah. He said, look at that. Not only does he get the 20 numbers right now, but he said, how is, White going to bring that home? He's going to be leaving repeated shots, even if you don't hit him right away. So you can even gammon him. And so, yeah. And I don't think today most people would not have a problem with it. But, for 1982, I thought that was very, very insightful. And if you meet somebody who can talk about positions like that, you should probably listen to them.
Yeah, yeah. I tell people back games are so complicated, someone can write an entire book about it.
Yeah, I think I read a good one.
Yeah, I remember you reviewed my book, so thank you very much for that. Well, wonderful.
Well, thank you for writing it.
Oh, my
It was
pleasure.
my
It was
pleasure
a
to
lot of
read it.
work. I mean, I think like people ask me about that, and I tell people, I've been contributing to these online forums, and they said you should write a book. So I thought, what should I write about? And I'd actually written a book before on openings, and it's not really been formally published, but there've been so many books written about that. I said, I want to write about something that has never really been written about. And there have been some chapters here and there, but nothing like too comprehensive. And even my book's not completely comprehensive, but it's, as comprehensive as it gets for what we have about back games. So,
I can remember Paul back in the 70s in writing and, in the 80s in conversation, talking about writing a book on back games. That was going to be one of his projects. And, of course, like me, he had a lot of, ideas for books that never got finished.
yeah, lots of ideas. Well, great. Thank you so much, my good friend Jake Jacobs. It's a pleasure to see you on camera. I always look forward to the tournaments in Los Angeles because I can sit with you, and I'd love it when you join me on commentary. Lots of good stories. People really enjoy that. It's really a pleasure to see you. You have an open invitation to come back. We'll go ahead and conclude the video. Thank you to the viewers for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, what you'd like to see in future videos so I can work on it. And I appreciate your super thanks. These small donations help me continue to create the high quality content that you enjoy. And with the membership feature, you can get exclusive access to the most popular videos. Again, my book, which we discussed, Backgammon, Backgame Strategies, is available. There's a link in the description to where you can get it. And if you're interested in lessons, please contact me via email. My email address is also in the description. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. And until then, keep rolling your dice.